Hello everyone, I'm finally back. I do apologize for the long wait. This summer has been quite eventful. But now, I'm finally getting back around to finishing off the series. Welcome back to Let's Read Black Star by Toby. This is chapter 12. In the previous chapter, we finally have a name of our target, as well as a possible clue that he could be behind the Dead Sea. I won't spoil it for those who haven't seen my previous video or read the previous chapter, and this is going to have a huge spoiler for the previous chapter, so make sure that you either read the previous chapter or watch my video where I read the previous chapter along with you to avoid spoilers. With that out of the way, let's start. I'm sorry if I'm sounding a bit hoarse. My throat is, hasn't been doing well, but, well, we'll just continue on. We've got 7 chapters left. Akechi spent the train ride huddled inside Ryuji's hoodie, suitcase on his lap, eyes constantly flicking here and there in a mad effort to see if anyone was watching him, but without meeting their gaze. He needn't have worried. The effects of Paranoia Syndrome were even clearer to him than most. Tokyo hadn't possessed this dreadful, distracted atmosphere when he'd set off to the diet building all those months ago. Most of the other passengers wouldn't look up from their phones. The ones who didn't hold phones rocked back and forth in place, as if trying to lull themselves to sleep. As he stepped off, he thought he heard the woman nearest the door quietly weeping. It was as though all things teetered on the edge of some final and yet unseen precipice. He'd also been concerned about the Shimizu family's apartment, the security of it. A camera or a doorman would cause his disguise to fall apart very quickly. Fortunately, their building turned out to be like hundreds of others, an off-white 10-story polygon from which pitiful balconies jutted like overbite. He stopped by the buzzers and looked up and down the claustrophobic streets. No one to be seen. The sound of distant traffic carried over like bad weather. A few small and skeletal trees rattled in the wind, their jagged shadows crawling in the mid-morning sun like grasping hands. Every shape seemed wrong. He set down his briefcase again and took out his phone. Or, that was to say, Futaba's phone, because Futaba had given him her phone. Akechi's years spent in the Dead Sea may have helped him retain an eldritch app or two, but unfortunately the same didn't apply to his data plan. Futaba had figured this out before anyone else, and thrust her phone upon him as soon as he'd gotten back from the bathhouse, monitoring the situation from her laptop in the meantime. He was very careful to stick to its most basic functions. Given its owner, he half suspected that any attempt to prod around in the other apps would literally blow up in his face. Like if Futaba had snuck a bomb on one of the apps if she wanted to. Like seriously, if she wanted to, she could have just taken revenge for her mother and all the trauma that it caused. But no. Futaba isn't like that. Moving on. GA. I'm here. Otsuka 9 comb room 144, correct? Yup. Like Ducky from The Land Before Time. Unless she forgot herself, Miss Shimizu was there too. I know all and see all. Were you spotted? I don't believe so. Current events have distracted people. Yeah, no shit. I had to put up with that when we were investigating. Made me want to break someone's nose just to wake them up. Don't do that, though. Noted. Any other advice? As of now, my intent is to probe for any traumatic events or neurosis, which could lead to the distortion necessary to foster a palace. Pardon me. Given the nature of who we're dealing with, I'm hoping that won't be too difficult. Don't be so certain. Many people are quite adept at hiding their true selves. Right. Just don't forget about that thing I gave you. It should snag us a leader 10 if all else fails. Understood. I'm off then. He hung up, opened the briefcase, pulled off Ryuji's hoodie, and tucked it inside. Then he straightened his back, breathed deep, and pressed the buzzer. Ding dong! For a long while, there was only silence. He began to feel uncomfortable. Little chance of getting into the apartment without someone to let him in. He briefly regretted not somehow smuggling Morgana and his unnaturally deft paws along. Then a voice layered with fuzz. Hello. Smile, he remembered. They can hear your face and your voice. But not too wide, they'll think you're a solicitor. Calibrate your speech to be helpful, concerned, slightly brusque. So your every word will say underneath, I'm here for you, but I have quite the busy schedule. Good afternoon, he said. Am I speaking to Azusa Shimizu? Azusa Shimizu. Yes, who is this? I'm with the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department, ma'am. Do you have a moment to speak? Concerning what? Expected. That sudden sheen of ice in her voice, that hint of suspicion, the flinching away from the prying eye of society. I'm sorry, but I wasn't expecting... That is to say, my husband isn't home. Lower your voice, tone and timbre. Conspiratorial, apologetic. I'm very sorry for the lack of notice, Miss Shimizu. You're not in any trouble. I'm part of an investigative unit working in tandem with the SIU regarding the Paranoia Syndrome phenomenon. Forgive me for asking, but I believe your son, Seki, was among the first afflicted? No answer. For a moment, he was certain she'd hung up. I kept asking. That layer of ice had thickened, and there was something dark crashing within. My husband and I both, we all but got down on our knees and begged. You, the hospital, the news, I kept telling them something was wrong. And now, here you are, like you're doing me a favor. He should have expected this. I'm very sorry, Miss Shimizu. I don't know what to say. Wounded, surprised, no longer a member of the police, but this woman sacrificial lamb. I don't think you should say anything. I think you better go. I wasn't aware of the department shutting you out like this. I can't pretend to understand what you suffered. But please, if there's anything at all I can do, anything you can help us with, I really need to speak with you further. Add a slight vibrato. Indicate desperation. I don't know if we'll have another chance. Another long silence. Then the front door buzzed and unlocked. Jeez. I'm gonna have a slight cough over this, but I gotta... Sorry. Maybe Sojiro was right. Maybe he was a bad actor. But he personally believed that he could perform a lot better on a full stomach and without a gun in his face. The Shimizu's apartment was on the second floor. He smoothed his lapels and straightened his tie. He went up the stairwell, the echoes of his footsteps trailing him like muggers in waiting. That old familiar state of mind returned to him. A hissing blankness in his head like a phone left off the hook. In that emptiness, he molded the soft clay of himself into whatever shape was necessary. It wouldn't have been unfair to say that the Goro Akechi that first emerged from the Dead Sea was what he looked like unmolded. Something colorless and lumpen and barely passing as alive. Sorry if I'm mixing up words, it's been quite a while since I last read a chapter. He stood in front of the door, adjusted his features, 2 parts trepidation to 1 part concern, and knocked. It opened immediately. I was just checking how much recording time I have. Azusa Shimizu turned out to be a pale and homely stump of a woman with an unflattering bob haircut. Its overgrown bangs almost, but not quite, hiding the steely, observant glint in her eye. She wore ragged jeans and a cable-knit sweater that looked like it had lost a couple of rounds with a taffy puller. He could see the lecture forming on her lips before she recognized his face, and then those eyes went wide. He smiled disarmingly. "Hello, Miss Shimizu. I apologize again. In person this time." "I know you. You're that boy who was on all the talk shows." "Well, I occasionally do some detective work as well, you know." "You look horrible." His smile nearly slipped. Evidently the bathhouse hadn't done as much good as he'd hoped. "Why did they send you here?" "Well, the police do keep me busy. Especially now that I don't have the talk shows to distract me." Sheepish. Self-effacing. "Could, I come in? I'd be happy to explain further, but this hallway is a bit drafty." She watched him a moment longer. Then she stepped away and retreated further into the apartment. Akechi followed, shutting the door behind him. He took in the foyer as he slipped off his shoes. A typical 2-bedroom dwelling. Small, low-ceilinged, not much in the way of decoration. Apparently interior design wasn't the Shimizu family's strong suit. The kitchen was just off to his right, the buttery afternoon light pulling on the table and the countertops. The sink was heaped with dirty dishes. There was a faint, off-putting aroma in the air. So they weren't keeping it clean. But it lacked that veneer of yellowed filth he remembered from some of the foster institutions. This uncleanliness was a recent development. He didn't have to think hard to guess what had brought it on. Miss Shimizu went to the counter, fretting over a coffee pot. "Pardon me?" "All this time and they send a child," she muttered. "With all due respect, Detective." "I can't say it in the mode of very much respect in the first place, especially after we kept you waiting for so long." "When did you finally figure out this was a problem?" She moved to the sink, swept over a rough edifice of plates, and began to rinse out the coffee pot. "After it became a national crisis or a worldwide one?" "I can make no excuses for the department, but unfortunately I have little control over what cases they take and when. Not to mention, as you know, my credibility has suffered after the Phantom Thieves incident and all." She turned, and one of those overbright eyes pinned him. "I imagine you amuse yourself reading the tabloids after you dropped off the map. I kept up with them for a while. Whatever became of the charismatic detective? You were dead, you were in jail, you changed your identity, and been transferred to Scotland Yard. I could have filled a scrapbook, but instead, What? They just put you on a leash? Haha, unflattering, but not wrong. I did embarrass the department to a rather severe degree. The half-truths caught like jawbreakers under his tongue. But I still make myself useful. They're keeping me on retention until they think it's acceptable to let me back into the public eye. And my son is your second chance at the big time, hmm? She set down the pot with a harsh clunk. This was not an appropriate moment to continue smiling. He briefly covered his mouth with his hand as he tried to contort his face into the right expression. No, that's not... I'm sorry. He lowered his hand to reveal a shamed grimace. This isn't about me, in any case. Bigger things are at stake. We're trying to determine commonalities between Paranoia Syndrome cases. As I'm sure you know, it doesn't appear to be constrained by location or physiology, so we've selected a number of noteworthy cases to try and find similarities elsewhere. Background, medical history, mental state. Anything could be useful. Mental state? So you think this is some kind of psychological problem? We're not ruling anything out. This is a poor time to be a skeptic. He wrenched his eyes away from the woman's stare and looked at the walls instead. Some photographs here, not many. One, a black and white portrait of a man in a suit, looking uncomfortable in his middle age. Jowls, paunch, a badly receding hairline. Mr. Shimizu, he imagined. There was another of a mop-headed boy looking into the camera alongside a panting Shiba Inu. Shiba Inu! The boy held the dog's leash in one bony hand, bearing it up like a slack noose. He stepped up to the picture, feeling wary. A pet could make things awkward. Animals didn't like him. Shiba Inus I've only looked up photographs of them, but Shiba Inus are like the cutest dogs in the world. One Shiba Inu took over the world. Seriously. I take it this is Seki. And... your dog? Akechi. He died a little over 2 years ago. Oh, I'm so sorry. My condolences. An accident? From what he'd seen of Shimizu in the Dead Sea, he wouldn't be surprised if he'd killed the animal himself. That would certainly give their investigation something to work with. I would rule it out, though. What kind of child would kill an animal, especially a dog? Absolutely cruel. Whoever does it is absolute scum. He was old. He got sick. Seki took it well, but I know he was crushed. We had Akechi since he was a toddler. I'm right there with you. When I was young, we had several cats. And, well, one of them had a horrible accident, and there was nothing the vet could do, so they had to put him down. Or put her down. What do you mean he took it well? No tears. Didn't make a scene. He had us take away his leash and bowl and everything a week later. He's a very serious boy. A brief note of horror accompanied the accidental slip into the past tense. We weren't surprised when he was accepted to Kosei. That was his cue to move down the wall. Here was a picture of Seki bearing up his letter of acceptance, standing between his parents. His features were easier to make out now. Compared to his parents, he was slimmer, features sharp-edged and aquiline, black hair falling in tangles down to his neck. All of them beamed into the camera. The parents looked ready to burst with pride, but Shimizu's own smile didn't reach his eyes. He stared warily out of the frame, as if telling Akechi to step away and move on. "How was he in school?" Akechi asked. "I know he had no disciplinary history, but that only says so much." "Worked hard. Good grades. He didn't bring friends around and he didn't go in much for clubs or anything, but it was only his first year. I told Yuichi to give him time. He always liked to keep himself to himself anyway." He turned and faced her. She'd already gotten another pot brewing. Compared to LeBlanc, the smell was like burnt rubber and nicotine. "Miss Shimizu, I understand this may be a delicate question, but were there any domestic issues leading in the period leading up to Seki's illness? Anything that may have caused him stress?" I've been asking myself that." She leaned against the counter, caught in the window's sunbeam. It illuminated wispy strands of hair that swayed like seaweed atop her scalp. "But I don't recall anything dramatic. I mean, we work a lot. My husband in particular." Reproach crept into her voice. "More and more lately. And I'm freelance, so the money, well, it isn't always there. But he didn't want for anything. We made sure of that. As for violence, loud arguments into the night, Yuichi showing up drunk with lipstick on his collar? No, nothing of the sort." She rocked on her heels a bit. "So you think this disease is stress-related? No wonder the whole world's susceptible." She was sharp, all right. "As I said, we're examining all angles. What about Seki himself? Was anything amiss about him?" "He was fine. He seemed tired in the mornings, but the new school year was starting, so that was probably nerves. Then one night, he just didn't wake up." The coffee boiled and frothed. "The hospital won't let us see him anymore." Miss Shimizu sounded calm, pensive. Akechi recognized the behavior from Shido. She'd taken her rage and carefully jarred it and set it on a shelf in case she needed it later. "I don't understand how that's acceptable." "It's the room he's in. They keep the air conditioning much too high. How is he supposed to recover if he's always so cold?" A pause. "Would you like some coffee or anything?" "In a minute, perhaps." The smile returned, wider this time. "What luck," it said. "Now we're friends. If I may, could I take a quick look at Seki's room? I promise to respect his privacy." She frowned, but not for long. "Behind you. Down the hall. Please don't disturb his things." "Of course." Time for a break.